Askreddit by Redmambo06. People who quit their jobs on the first day. What was your I'm outta here moment? Not technically first day but second day. When I was 20 or so I got hired to be a temporary floor member for Forever 21 during the holiday season. My training started a week before Black Friday, so the store was already kind of in chaos. On my first day of training I walked in and the floor manager gave all the new hires a tour showing us the facility and layout of the store. After this I was assigned to a veteran floor member to shadow and get an idea of what my job was and what my duties would be. As soon as I was assigned, the manager dipped, never to be seen again. An hour and a half into my shift, my shadowee got an emergency family call and had to take off for a week. When this happened I found some other floor manager and explained the situation and asked them who else I should shadow. The manager's response was, just do what you can by yourself, you'll be fine. Everyone else is busy. Figured we'll okay, I'll try. I don't know if any of you have shopped in the women's section of Forever 21, but during seasonal sales they will have multiple articles of clothing that all look almost exactly the same but with slight differences. A white cardigan with 4 buttons that looked literally the same as a white cardigan with 5 buttons. The best part was these different items were often placed in completely separate parts of the store, and it was the job of the dressing room to return the unpurchased items to the correct section so the employees could put them back on the shelves. Well, these employees fucking sucked and I didn't know if they were a part of my section or not, so I'd spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to find where they go before realizing, wait, this isn't even my section. I've checked literally every rack, so I'd put it back on the sorting rack and move to the next item. More than 50% of. The next day I come in and the store manager pulls me to her office and tells me how slow I was the day before and if I want to keep working here I need to be very fast. I explained my lack of training and unfamiliarity with the store, and she told me if I didn't know where the clothes were in sections I should come in my free time and memorize where stuff was at. I spent the rest of my shift putting clothes in random fucking places, then never came back for a third shift. Fuck that place and their management. I worked a seasonal floor position at Forever 22 too. The store was always a mess, and it was rearranged every week. No one knows where anything goes. I just put things together that look roughly the same since it was all gonna get shuffled to shit in an hour anyway. I quit when I got the flu and they said if I didn't get a doctor's note it would be a red mark in my file. I said nah, you don't give me health insurance and I'm not in kindergarten. Started with a better store down the mall from them a week later. TLDR 21 sucks. I used to work at a craft store as a cashier, but quit when I moved. Ended up going back a couple years later to make some extra cash, but this time in the framing department. During the interview they swore up and down I would only ever be a backup cashier because I said I refused to have full cashier shifts. First shift after interview is listed as framing, but I'm put on cash and told that actually most of my shifts would be cash since they'd found someone else for framing. I spent the next 6 hours giving everyone who came to my register 20% off of everything and then never went back. A hero to us all. My first internship was at a Brazilian teen detention center. It's akin to a prison, but Brazilian law has some distinctions between crimes committed while as an adult or as a teenager. Teens go through socio-educational measures. I was walking through a courtyard with my supervisor when some doctors came running, flailing their arms and screaming, while officers came running from the opposite direction. I get pulled by my supervisor who just tells me to run back to our office. These teens as young as 12 had escaped their block. A few minutes later an officer comes knocking on the doors of the offices and yelling for everyone to run outside because a fire had broken out. Some of the teens had set mattresses on fire in their cells. I didn't really know out. My teacher did, she hadn't even been there that day. So I was forced by the university to choose another place to intern at. Oh well. Wasn't exactly the first day, but I didn't show up after the second shift. It was a rather popular cafe chain in my country. I was hired to work in the kitchen as a cook along with another senior cook. Let's put aside the fact that I had zero cooking knowledge whatsoever. The senior cook was leaving the kitchen every 5 minutes to smoke. So there I am, Alone in the kitchen, orders are printing fast, and I'm standing there not sure what to do first, and the waitress comes over yelling at me to cook shit I don't have any business cooking, definitely not on my own. Later on, the senior cook told me they had at least 2 rats running around the kitchen. Showed me they pooped on a plate. I never came back and I'm glad the place got shut down. When I burned my hands all night on the 2 hot plates as a food runner, they wouldn't let me use towels to carry them and said I just had to get used to it. Nope. I was 17 and working precast concrete. Refused to use a rusted to shit ladder. Supervisor called me a pussy, got up about 7 runs before his foot went through one. Hurt his foot snap as he fell. I called an ambulance and walked to my car in the parking lot. Walk it off. Don't be a pussy. I was a cashier at Lowe's during college for less than a full day. I made it through the multiple day training, but there was so much stupid shit going on I almost thought I was on a hidden camera show. All of the employees complained about how hard they had to work while simultaneously not getting enough hours. Nobody understood why they were hiring like 4 new people. I was one of those 4. Turns out it's because they were progressing through a sexual harassment complaint that required restructuring of the store and firing of some employees. This was known to HR and explained to new hires against company policy, but wasn't known to the employees, apparently some of whom still worked there, including the fucking person doing the training. She was really inappropriate and said not to worry about the sexual harassment stuff, that everything would go back to normal soon enough and we wouldn't have to be so uptight. They fired her the day before I started, along with one of the cashiers who trained me. She also offered me terrible guidance for the application process. They were looking for part-time help and 2 of the 3 days they needed help on I had off from school. I told them I could work nights most nights, but if they needed daytime help it had to be on those days. She said if I was too restrictive they wouldn't keep me on. Lied to my boss about my availability to make me even more attractive than I already was, wink, and told me to schmooze them a bit and I'd make it further. She said in the end it wouldn't impact anything, and I'd get those days. My first week's schedule, I was working mornings every day that I was in school, and I wasn't given any hours on my days off. Aside from the fact that I was given 2 times the hours the position called for when other employees were shorted, my work schedule was literally impossible to consolidate with my school schedule. I only went to work on my first day to tell them I was quitting and that their application process was a fucking mess. They couldn't figure out how so much went wrong and then they asked who trained me and everything made sense. They thanked me for at least showing up to quit, unlike the other 3 they hired, who just stopped returning their calls and no-showed their first days. My first ever job. I was 13 and I would be delivering phone books from the back of a van through people's letterboxes. So I'd be in the back of the van with the phone books and there was an older guy driving slowly while I went back and forth to the van houses with the books. At one point the van was getting quite empty, so there was more space to move around and we had finished the delivery in the street we were paid to deliver to and he drove to another. While driving there he drove, let's say, aggressively and I fell inside the back where the books were. I wasn't sitting in a seat as the van had no seats in the back. As I put my hand out to steady myself I accidentally laid it across a portable radio that had its antenna extended, but the antenna was also broken halfway and razor sharp. It sliced the palm of my hand clean open 3-4 inches. I can only describe what I saw as gruesome. I said to him to pull the van over and I needed help. He saw my hand and just threw me a plastic bag, the kind you get at a supermarket, and told me to wrap my hand in it. Then, he continued with the deliveries. At least he delivered the remaining books himself. I should have been taken to hospital or at least home to my parents. I quit after that and never showed up again. As you can imagine, my parents were quite angry at him. On the first day of working at Amazon warehouse, the managers broke down to everyone how 15-minute break works there. Walking to the break room is 2. 1/2 minutes, 10 minutes of actual break, and then 2. 1/2 minutes to go back to your stations. It took me 2. 1/2 minutes to walk to my car and I took a forever break. Also you have 3 minutes to use the bathroom but the nearest bathroom is a 5-minute walk away. Summer job working for a landscape architect. Got to the job site and he asked me to dig a hole in some rocky dirt. I asked for a shovel. He didn't have one. I asked for a hand spade. He didn't have one. He told me to just dig the hole with my bare hands and then he drove off to another site leaving me completely alone. I dug for a little bit and then said fuck this and left. Had the job specified that I needed to supply my own tools I could have but it didn't and I wasn't going to work for somebody that expected folks to dig through hard, rocky soil with their hands. Lol sounds like he sucks at communicating. Those bosses are the worst. 2 times. Once I applied for and got a telemarketing job. I didn't know what it entailed. After an hour I knew it was a terrible fit, auto-dialing people during their dinners, trying to sell them stuff they didn't want, reading a horrible script while sitting in a soulless grey cubicle. I got up, went to the manager, apologized and said it wasn't a good fit for me. He seemed understanding. Another time I attended a make easy money at this job seminar and it turns out it was selling knives door to door. IDK if I technically quit or just noped out at the end of it. I noped out of an interview one time. Thanked them at the end and said it wasn't for me. Those interviewing, management level folks, started arguing with each other in front of me during the interview. I figured, if this is the vibe at the management level then I sure as hell don't want to be your employee. Answered an ad in the paper. This was the mid-90s, what seemed to be an office job making sales calls when I was in college. Did a phone interview and was called back for an in-person interview. When I go to the interview I'm led into a room with about 50 other people and a small stage at the front of the room. We're all somewhat confused as to what is going on. Finally a guy gets on the stage and informs us that we've been selected for the opportunity to sell Cutco. Me and 2/3 RDS of the rest stood up and walked out. Anytime I see more than a dozen people for a job interview, I just nope the fuck right out. If it's not door-to-door sales paid only on commission it's some MLM. I wish some job interviews would be more forthcoming about that. Some places have outright lied to me. Restaurant. Swept under my station when we were closing. Giant brown pile came out with broom from under low boy fridge. Pile began to scatter. It was hundreds of roaches. Never returned. Did you call the health department? That is just too gross for words. A long time ago, not long after getting my papers as a chef I had an interview at a hotel for a position in the kitchen. The executive chef and I chatted in his office for about 20 minutes. At the time I remember him coming off as very arrogant, which is quite common in this field. I didn't think much of it at the time as the pay was decent and the shift was what I wanted. As I was leaving his office I turned to leave through the dining room the way I had come in, which was closed at the time. It was another hour or so before service started and he says to me, "No, not that way. Go through the kitchen. You are not good enough to go through the dining room." I was so surprised by what he said, I just did what he asked without a word. Later on, after I had got home, I phoned him up and said that after having a close look I decided that his menu wasn't good enough and that I wouldn't be accepted. I felt a sear from here. Restaurant line chef. Worked a 12-hour shift, was given 2 breaks of about 10-15 minutes each. Burned my hand numerous times because they gave me plates that came right from the oven and never said a word. End of the shift I told the head chef I was done. He called me soft and said I was the 3rd person to quit on him after a day. I said maybe it's the way you treat people. Got what was supposed to be a prestigious political internship that came with a security clearance and everything. Found out at orientation that the part-time internship was really 40-60 hours, unpaid, and that no intern had gone on to work with the organization and weren't really given a leg up for other federal posts. We were supposed to facilitate meetings with heads of state, coordinate conferences and assist the actual employees with composing published research papers for which we would not be credited. They were definitely drinking their own Kool-Aid, so I bounced right on out of there. I got hired at a very small knockoff dollar store in an old, failing mall. The owner was foreign with a very thick accent. He told me I'd get $6 an hour but neglected to mention it was under the table. I spent about an hour stocking the very overly cluttered shelves before I was told to get more chips out of the back storage area. I walk back there and there's about a dozen men sitting on boxes all crammed into a small back room. I asked where the chips were and these guys all glared at me. They started speaking in another language and rapidly motioned towards me. Then one guy got up and asked what I needed. I told him I was supposed to get a box of chips and he got a box out of the pile and handed it to me. The entire time these guys are all staring at me. Everything back there looked shady as all hell and it was very uncomfortable. A while later I had to use the restroom which was also in the back. These guys all just wordlessly glared at me while I went into the woman's restroom. While I was in the restroom, someone tried to open the door. I was the only woman there. The owner told me he wanted me to come back that night late in the evening well after the mall closed. I didn't show up. I came in the next morning and lied about why I couldn't work there. He still gave me the few bucks from what little time I did work. I don't know what in the hell that guy had going on there and I didn't want to find out. Edit. Forgot to add in the best part. I was 18 and this was supposed to have been my first job. I was more concerned about the door being tried. I answered an ad for a babysitting job. I was already working on a casual basis but it was sporadic so I thought some after hours babysitting would be welcome extra cash. The couple were both in the military and proceeded to tell me that I would be staying in the spare room and looking after their 6-month-old child around the clock as well as doing the housework. I would have one day off every 2 weeks. They said it is cash in hand so I could sign on to the unemployment benefit to make up the rest of the money. I left on the spot. They wanted a live-in housemaid and nanny, not a babysitter, and they were not able to pay for one. Why they thought it was up to me to illegally collect the doll to subsidize them I don't know. I've heard of situations similar to this before. Often they've had someone work for them with that arrangement previously so they think it's somehow normal or okay. You sometimes see people wanting full-time childcare and paying like $100 a week because their friend had been happy with that arrangement. It's a bit different when it's a total stranger who doesn't owe the family any favors. Applied for a job at my longtime favorite restaurant, celebrated my birthday there every year. Owner asks me to come in for basically a tryout. As I communicated I was looking at other job possibilities. I come in and they just stick me on dishwashing for an hour, no biggie. Then their dishwasher doesn't show up, so the kitchen manager asks me to stay one for their lunch rush. Sire, I'll get paid for the hours. I do. Kitchen staff was nice so I was happy to help out even though I figured I'd be taking a different job. I fill out a time card at the end of the shift and tell the manager I probably won't be back. He understands and thanks me for the help. Fast forward a couple weeks and he tells me to email the owner after I ask him if I should pick up my measly paycheck. I do. She basically tells me to fuck off over text. Tells me it was staging and that she told me I won't be paid. I respond that I understand that but that I stayed an extra 3 hours which I was told I'd be paid for. She stops responding. I decide I want to be petty over the $40 so I get the state labor department involved. Dude goes in there and makes her pay me for the hours including the first staging hour. Couple weeks later I got my $40. Never went back to that restaurant. Edit. Firstly, petty is not how I see it 2 years later. I'm very glad I did this and sharing the story with others in my city. I learned this practice was very common with local restaurants.